Hi, everybody. Today is Monday, February 3rd, 2025. And also, then, welcome back, Larry.
Man, the year is blitzing by. February. Good
Yeah.
grief.
Larry, let's get started with what's going on right now in the United States with USAID.
Hmm.
That there are many things right now going on, and they're talking about they were funding color revolutions all over the world. They're talking about this institution getting more money than State Department and CIA together. What's going on, and what was the main purpose of this institution?
Well, you have to go back to the 1960s. It was set up by John Fitzgerald Kennedy, President Kennedy, and that was still we were in the heart of the Cold War back then, and there was this. Most people your age today won't have any understanding uh, or appreciation, but back then it was really seen as a competition between capitalism and communism. And the Marxist dialectic and the played a big role in terms of development. This was a development model for the then called Third World, what we now call the Global South. And there was a pushback in the United States. There was one of the Kennedy advisors, an economist named Walt Rostow, had a book that was a sort of a must read in academia at the time called The Five Stages of Economic Growth. And so there was it was almost a utopian vision of capitalism that, we'll put this agency out there that's going to promote development. And, I was even caught up in it academically because my master's degree was in community development. And one of the instructors, I look back now, he is actually probably former agency, because CIA had been heavily involved with the Agency for International Development. But it was all about basically trying to exert U.S. influence over other countries. Um, it has not received a lot of attention in the press over the last 10 years. But as you correctly noted, its growth budget in terms of budget is phenomenal. Um, and I always used to assume it was part of State Department, but the people who worked there never saw themselves as part of State Department. I recall we had a training. We had brought a group of Egyptian police officers to the United States for some training under the Anti-Terrorism Assistance Training Program back in 1991. Shows you how old I'm in. 34 years ago, and uh, there was an issue. They stopped showing up to class. It was being offered down actually in New Orleans, of all things, and they were going on shopping trips during the day. But the money, actually, the training money for this had been put up by AID. So I got on the phone. They literally were in the same building. It's the State Department building, and so I got on the phone with with the officer that was responsible, and he was talking to me like I lived in a foreign country. You people over at State, you got a problem. I said, we all get paid by the U.S. Treasury. Aren't we part of one team here? Oh, no, no, no. They're a completely different animal. They have apparently been the primary funder of this illegal migration effort into the United States, as well as paying, they'll pay Italian kids to go to Georgia, Georgia the country, not Georgia the state, to protest. Same thing in Romania. So it needs, candidly, it needs to be killed bureaucratically, wiped out. It shouldn't exist. it needs to no longer be allowed in polite company. So the fact that Trump, I give the Trump team credit, man. Somebody flagged this to them, and they took it seriously. So they're acting to shut it down. The fact that Samantha Power, the former UN ambassador, was the head of it should have been a tell right there. Or, warning.
Do they have offices in other countries, or it's all about the United States?
No, they'll have offices. They'll be attached to embassies, U.S. embassies, but also they work through the non-governmental organization realm. Yeah, no. So it's really it's a nefarious outfit.
And when it comes to this soft power of the United States, how successful were they so far, in your opinion, if that was the investment on their part?
Well, they weren't just working by themselves in isolation. In fact, I think in several instances you can make a case, like in Ukraine, that they worked hand in glove with the CIA. And so this is a way that this is sort of covert action without it being covert action. It's just, the United States, it's like a Halloween costume. They're dressed up as democracy when they're anything but. They're actually death, and death disguised as democracy. So this is really, it's fascinating to watch how this is affecting certain organizations in other countries. They're in desperation mode. We don't have any live on-the-ground reporting out of the Darien Gap in Panama, but apparently, the money's dried up, and as a consequence of that, the flood of immigrants, of these people wanting to immigrate illegally into the United States, is dried up.
Larry, it's so amazing that you see they're talking about this is a left-wing sort of organization pushing for the left-wing ideologies. But Fico said that they were trying to do color revolution in Slovakia.
Yeah.
With NGOs. We know that Fico is a left-wing president in Slovakia. Is that all about ideology?
Okay, so can you define for me what makes somebody left-wing and what makes somebody right-wing?
Not anymore.
Yeah,
No.
I'm not sure. In theory, the difference used to be that left-wing was that the government owned all means of production, that the government controlled. There was no private property, that it was all public property. It was under the auspices of the government. And the right wing, or the conservatives, were ones who said, no, the government is one with limited power, and that the private individuals own the property, own the means of production. That's the old school. Now, it's just their labels thrown around to try to smear people. He's a right winger. He's a left winger. He's, we've it's happened here in Florida. It's really pretty interesting, and you would not have heard about this, but over the last 2 weeks, Governor DeSantis called a special session of the legislature to come in and update Florida law so that they could assist Donald Trump's government in getting rid of these illegal migrants. So it's a Republican, remember, this is supposedly a right-wing, Republican-controlled legislature. They've got the majority, overwhelming majority in both the Senate and the House. What'd they do? They passed legislation, but they didn't pass what DeSantis wanted. They passed legislation where instead of giving the governor the power to make decisions about, the cooperation with ICE and getting people taken out of the state, they put it with the head of the Department of Agriculture. Now, why would they do that? Well, guess what? You got a lot of these wealthy Republican assholes who are making money by exploiting as slave labor these foreign migrants. They are literally using them like slaves. They get paid sub-minimum wage. They don't get health care. They live in almost inhuman conditions. And these right-wingers, these conservatives, all they cared about was the bottom, their money going into their pocket. What's the difference between that and left wing? Because the left wing allows it to go on too. So that's why I say I'm so thoroughly disgusted by it. I hate them both. I just despise them both because there is zero respect for these human beings. Look, I don't think these people should be here in the country. They've broken the law. If I tried to do that in Mexico or Honduras, they'd kick my ass out right away. So, in the same, I've lived in Argentina. I had to get a visa. I had to go through a process. But the system of exploitation that's underway, the human trafficking, using them both as drug mules, as sex workers, and then to put, particularly kids, are put into work in chicken farms, pig farms, turkey farms, egg. It's wrong. But these conservatives and these liberals and leftists, I think it's meaningless anymore. It's just a device to try to distract people from actually dealing with real substantive issues.
Larry, getting to the situation in Ukraine, Russia bombed a hotel in Odessa, which they were talking about the mercenaries, foreign mercenaries, were in that place. And do you think that the war is expanding and is getting to Odessa? Is that gonna change in the near future?
They've been carrying out strikes there, throughout the entire course of this last 3 years. The war's reaching what I think von Clausewitz called a culmination point, in which the pace of losses that Ukraine is suffering is accelerating, not decelerating. And they're not able to replace that personnel with new recruits. In fact, the recruitment level is falling, about 50%. Let's say they're losing 50,000 a month in casualties, and they're only able to recruit 25,000 new recruits. Well, just do the math. You got a $25,000 deficit every month. It would be like your rent. You have to pay $1,000 a month, but your salary is only $500 a month. Guess what? You can no longer pay the rent, and that's what's happening to Ukraine. What was interesting is the Zelensky government. They went on a big propaganda effort to claim that this attack on that hotel was, attacking civilians. And great, let's see the bodies. It's one thing, they didn't show the bodies. If they showed the bodies, we would have seen some uniforms. So they just make the claim and show all the rubble, but don't show the bodies. I mean, at least in Palestine, in Gaza, you see, they'll be carrying the bodies of dead children. So that they're not lying when they say, hey, they've killed children. You see the bodies. It's just good. It's absolutely horrific.
Maybe the North Korean troops took them away with them.
There you go. What are you turning this into the Nema comedy hour? Yeah, isn't it fascinating? So was it like October 8th is when the North Koreans first showed up? And I forget the name of the New York Times reporter that was claiming that this was the case, but there wasn't any evidence. But that's what the intelligence community is telling them, CIA, and it was presented in this the explanation for it was this, that Russia was suffering so many losses. I mean, God Almighty, those Ukrainians were some vicious fighters, and they were just chewing up the Russians right and left. And therefore, the Russia needed more troops because Russia's barely hanging on by its fingertips. So the North Koreans, and first it was 2,000, then we heard 10,000, like 20,000, and nobody ever saw any pictures. And now we were told the other day, hey, boy, the Koreans have suffered so many losses, they're pulling out. Now, you're seeing nothing on this in social media in North Korea, nothing. What you think, a body or two would probably, a word would sneak out. This is all just part of a CIA information operation, and the media just went along with it. It was, garbage in, garbage out. The reality is, Ukraine is entering its last days, and we're seeing that across the board. The Marco Rubio is the new Secretary of State. When he's making all these calls to Europeans, Ukraine, what's going on in Ukraine? He doesn't talk about it. This is like that movie Fight Club. First rule of Fight Club: we don't talk about Fight Club. So now in the Trump administration, the first rule of Ukraine is we don't talk about Ukraine anymore. And then Zelensky's going, they said I got 177 billion, only 77 billion showed up. Where's that other 100 billion? So they're trying to go after the corruption. But Trump is talking to Putin, but not talking to Zelensky. And making clear, those elections got to be taking place in Ukraine. And Zelensky going, no, what election? Because if there was actually an election, he'd be gone. So I think Zelensky's days are numbered. I've been saying that for a while, like a broken clock. I'll be right twice a day, but it's not a good situation from the standpoint of Zelensky thinking that he's going to hang around and be the man. People are tired of his act. So he's trying to figure out how to survive, and I don't think he's got any control over the situation.
By the way, who's Zelensky to talk with? Who's Zelensky? Today is the president of Ukraine?
Well, and that's where Vladimir Putin has really made a point. Drawing on his legal background, he says, okay, if we sat down with Zelensky and he agreed to X, Y, and Z, he has no legitimate authority. Nothing that he signs off on would be treated under international law as a legal binding agreement. And people may think that Putin is being deceiving. But he genuinely believes this. He was trained as a lawyer. We won't hold that against him. But he's very much about properly dotting I's, crossing T's, and doing things in the right way. And it's really fascinating to watch the. Zelensky has gone from, we'll never talk to, well, okay, we've got to figure out how to talk. And he still doesn't get it. They're not getting any of the territory back. Putin's terms on this are quite clear. Get out of Zaporizhia, get out of Kherson, get out of Luhansk, get out of the Donetsk. Completely go. Pull out, pull back, and then we can talk about what kind of relationship our two countries will have going forward. And by the way, Crimea is never coming back. And I think before this is over, Putin's going to insist on taking Odessa as well.
I really do believe, Larry, that Putin is not going to let Ukrainians be in charge of Odessa, because he
No, no.
knows what's the importance of Odessa.
Well, right now, one of the interesting things that was exposed over the last week is the utter dependence of Ukraine on U.S. money. Because you had all this, what was left of their so-called independent media, turned out nothing but, let's call them what they are, CIA front groups. They're getting paid under AID money. And because they said, oh, we can't continue to operate because the money from the United States isn't coming in. And you go, whoa, wait a second. Yeah, so you're basically saying Uncle Sam's got to give you an allowance in order for you to keep operating. That tells you everything you need to know. So, and frankly, there's going to be, I think, more attention devoted to this, and there will be less activity within Kiev on that front with the so-called media and other non-governmental organizations. So, the overall, whatever they contribute to the war efforts, gone.
I don't know if you saw the video of Zelensky before, when he was trying to get elected in Ukraine. Here is what he said, Larry: to end the war, to negotiate with Putin, to do everything to prevent even a single death, to hold a referendum about the peace proposal, so that Ukraine decides and not him, to not make himself the smartest in the room. You look at this, each and every one of these lines, and he didn't do anything considering these sort of rhetorics on his part.
Well, that's why people vote, but it was again a mass deception. People voted for him believing really that he was sincere about that. And you know what? If he had pursued that agenda, the Russians would have made the deal. Go back and look at what Russia was willing to agree to in April of 2022, where they weren't going to insist on incorporating Donetsk and Luhansk as Soviet republics. Nope, they would stay in Ukraine. They just wanted to make sure that the Russian speakers weren't going to be persecuted and attacked and discriminated against. So we've gone from that to where now the Russians recognize you can't trust the West in any agreements. And they're going to, the notion that the Russians are going to be content to accept a ceasefire or freeze in place, they're not going to accept that. And the West and Trump and his team better wake up and recognize that, that's a non-starter. We may want that, but Putin and team, they recognize that all the West wants to do is try to figure out a way to keep Ukraine from bleeding to death, stop the bleeding, and then they can try to rebuild them as another military force for another attack on Russia. Ukraine has to be eliminated as a military threat, period. That's the Russian position now. That's not going to change. And anybody that thinks that that Ukraine's got some bargaining leverage in that is a dreamer.
And when you look at Russia, the way that they were fighting the whole West for 3 years, and their economy, their military, at least 100,000 soldiers were killed during the process of this fight.
Correct.
And how they're going to ignore all of that and go along with Donald Trump and his proposal and the proposal of Keith Kellogg, that should be understandable for the administration in the United States.
Well, they don't understand it. Again, they think, that Trump has gone sort of on, spoken out of both sides of his mouth on this issue. On the one hand, condemning Russia as a unprincipled aggressor and an invader of Ukraine, and then on the other hand, saying, "Oh, no, I understand why Russia did what it did because of the threat from NATO, how they perceived the threat of NATO." Russia, to me, it's clear once they want a comprehensive solution. Trump contributed to this problem. He walked away from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement, and as a result of that, Russia has now emerged with a weapons system, the Oreshnik, that is the most significant threat to the European countries since the 1990s, when they were concerned that Soviet intermediate range ballistic missiles were going to wipe them out. The U.S. doesn't have anything to counter that with. So, the U.S. has to come out and say, "Oh, please, Mr. Putin, get rid of that weapon that you're the only one that has." I think Putin's going to look at him and say, "Wait a second." To do that, the U.S. is going to have to give up some significant things. And part of that's going to be shutting down the bases, NATO bases in Poland and Romania. Put a halt to this massive base that they're constructing in Romania. So this is, so I think Trump genuinely wants to avoid a conflict with Russia, but there's still the strong political forces in the United States pushing for that. That's why I speak out as I do. This is, we've got an 80-year legacy of shame in terms of the United States trying to destroy Russia instead of embracing it. And, frankly, what Russia has become in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union should absolutely be one of the best friends, one of the strongest allies of the United States, and vice versa.
Larry, what's the importance of Czech Republic? Because right now in the Financial Times, if I'm not mistaken, they're talking about the new changes, political changes that may affect the aid going from NATO or from Europeans to Ukraine. What's that all about?
Yeah, I don't recall the name of the specific party that's anticipated to win the election, but they made it quite clear that, hey, this, making more artillery shells for Ukraine, no, that's going to stop. So, across the board, you're seeing a movement in the European countries. Before it was Orban and Hungary was sort of by himself. And then Fico comes on the scene, and he's sort of in bed with Orban, even though they, politically, they're not necessarily bedfellows. It has sort of different ideological perspectives. There has been a color revolution effort underway in Serbia, and yet Trump's blowing up of USAID, I think, may have put that on hold for a bit. The party that's come to power in Austria, also viewed as conservative, viewed as one willing, though, to have cordial relations with Russia. The Romanian, the just illegal interference of the European Union in Romania's election, and getting them to invalidate the votes of the people, has backfired. Georgescu is now more popular than he was when the election was held. So this, this sort of World Economic Forum, George Soros led, this new world global order that they tried to impose has fallen apart. And Trump's victory is actually sort of a further symptom of that, the collapse of that effort. And the left, they really, whatever we call these people, call them the left, call them the globalists, they don't know what to do. They're flailing.
But at least we can say that the nationalism is growing all over Europe, and not only in Europe but in the United States as well. Is that the case?
Well, yeah, nationalism is sort of the counter to the globalist vision. Trump is playing heavily to that, with his talk about annexing Canada, taking control of Greenland, getting they're doing a victory dance because the president of Panama says he's not going to renew the contract with the Chinese there's two Hong Kong companies that manage the ports in both Cologne and Panama City. That's going to be an interesting one to watch because, the Chinese have built up the infrastructure there. And, if Panama insists upon, hey, we're going to shut you out, I see the Chinese say, okay, we'll take our infrastructure and go home. And I guarantee you the United States is not prepared to provide the kind of port infrastructure that the Chinese have to keep those ports running efficiently, which could really lead to some major supply chain disruptions 2-3 years down the road. But this is an example of Trump trying to assert American national dominance. The problem you have in Europe is, there are nationalist movements, the AfD or AfD. I have never figured out why everybody wants to pronounce it with Spanish or Portuguese, AfD, AfD, Alternative for Deutschland. That they're still a minority party. They do not have a clear majority. There is no party that I'm aware of throughout Europe in any particular country that enjoys a majority support. So what this means is these countries are increasingly fragmented at a time that they on paper they say they need to be unified to deal with the threats from Russia or whatever, or China. So, I just look at that and think, that's a recipe for more chaos, not less.
Emmanuel Macron in France said that they're going to double their defense budget. The defense minister.
He's drinking some of that fine French wine,
Today I talked with Colonel Jacques. He said that is impossible for the situation that he sees in France. But on the other hand, German defense minister said that it's impossible, as they were talking about it before, that it's impossible to increase the defense budget from 2% to 5%. How is that, Larry, right now? When you look at the way that Donald Trump is talking about this increase in their defense budget, is that all about the security of Europe? Is that all about?
I think it's almost a ploy. I think Trump almost understands that if that is enforced, those countries will collapse or withdraw from NATO. That'll actually a way to bring it into NATO. So it's a way to end NATO without saying, hey, I'm going to end NATO. Because you do it, I'm here to save NATO. We've got to make NATO stronger. Everyone's got to kick in 5%. And, most are not going to do it, won't be able to do it. And Trump's going to say, go back and say, hey, we're not suckers. These guys are leeching off of us. They want us to pay the bill. It's like you got a group of 10 friends, and every time you go out to the restaurant, they want you to pick up the bill. And they're ordering expensive bottles of wine and, the lobster and steak. And, Nima's got to pay. That's how Donald Trump's portraying it. Uncle Sam's got to pay. No, Uncle Sam ain't going to pay no more. So, I think the NATO is, and frankly, NATO shouldn't exist. They should have had a ceremony and said, okay, this is great. While we oppose the Soviet Union is no more. Let's create something new that actually has Russia in it, so that we're no longer coming up with excuses to build expensive weapon systems. No, we need an external enemy, because if we don't have an external enemy, how do we justify an 800, now almost $900 billion defense budget in the United States? By God, bring back those commies in Russia. You know?
Larry, when you look at NATO and the way that it has been operating so far, you see the United States talking about without us. I'm talking about NATO, all the bases around the world. Without us, there would be huge chaos in all regions, but all of regions. How do you see the way that they're talking about this? It's about the United States and NATO and the United States. The history of this organization is not that long. Before this organization being formed, the world was just fine. Everybody was doing.
Well, the
It
world,
wasn't that great, but that wasn't a huge chaos.
well, it was a different kind of chaos. It was colonial chaos. So prior to World War II, really that period between the end of World War I, start of World War II, was when the colonial powers that had dominated the world during the 19th and 18th century. So you're talking French, the Spaniards, then later the Germans, but at the top of the list were the Brits. The Brits had this global empire, including, they have what they did to China. And then, the Boxer War and different Western intervention in China during, the end of the 19th into the start of the 20th century. With the break and that, so at the end of World War I, you see they carve up and start creating, Ukraine basically is a creature of World War I, as is Syria, as is Iraq. You get the maps of the Middle East are withdrawn or are redrawn to suit various colonial, the winners and losers. The Ottoman Empire, the Turks, man, they lost big time. So territory that they had claimed for 400 or 500 years, poof, went away. So that was that at the time was the New World Order. And in a way, sort of a cynical view is that the creation of NATO, in tandem with the creation of the United Nations, was a way to try to continue that colonial control of the peoples of Africa and Asia. Remember, the only reason the United States ultimately got involved in Vietnam was because the French were trying to preserve their, French colonies in, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. And again, what gave them the damn right to control the people who were born in those countries? Bunch of, the French culture, great for all its, good food and, great wine. They go halfway around the world to control, to rape materially these countries. And so that's now what's coming to an end. And, the exploitation that's taken place in Africa, particularly with rare earth minerals, so we can build electric vehicles to make a bunch of Western elite liberals happy and feel smug and self-righteous because we're saving the environment by forcing 13-year-old kids to work in Africa to mine this stuff. I mean, it's perverse. But the West ignores it. We don't. We're still exploiting the global South, and we don't want to admit it. And so, I hope that things have been set in motion that are going to bring an end to that system.
It seems, Larry, as much as the people in Africa, since you've mentioned them, are tired of the policies of the West, they're happy with the new situation, with the new sort of approach on the part of Chinese and Russians.
Yeah.
Is that crucial moment for the West to revise, to reassess its policies?
Well, look, what makes a difference is neither Russia or China have a history of enslaving or exploiting these people, of stealing their material wealth. That's the United States. That's United Kingdom. That's France. That's Germany. That's Italy. That's Spain. That's Europe. The colonial legacy, particularly in Africa, is significant. And I have seen personally that when the Russians or the Chinese deal with Africans, they don't treat them like they're a bunch of little black children to be, treat them with condescension. They're very condescending, and they don't treat them like inferiors. They treat them like equals. And people pick up on that. They're not stupid. They recognize if they're being, respected or not. The West simply does not respect. We want to boss and tell people around. That's what happened, with Rubio and Panama last night. We're going back and we're saying, hey, you're our bitch. Do what we tell you to do or else. The Panamanians they don't want to lose their visas. They want to come to the United States. They want to use U.S. banking services. So, they're going to try to terminate the contract with the Chinese company, even though this had nothing to do with China. This is all a pretext. But it's, the United States, I'm not sure, is in a position where we've got the expertise and ability to put workers overseas to run ports like the Chinese have run them.
There you wrote a very interesting piece on your website, sonar21.com.
I always write interesting pieces. Come on. Yeah. Okay.
Of course, that's the case.
Yeah. Okay, which one are you referring to now?
Trump's tariffs.
Oh, yeah.
You were mentioning comparing with border fix and immigration or an economic disaster. What is that? What's your assessment after all? What would that bring to the United States?
Well, it depends on where you sit. Now, he's immediately targeted Canada, Mexico, and China. Those are the top three trading partners with the United States. The reality is the United States imports a lot more from those countries than we export to those countries. So they sort of have a decided advantage. The imposition, and I had a long discussion with one of my buddies who's a chartered financial analyst. Now, he insists that while it is true that if you're going to impose a 25% tariff, that's a tax. So let's say that right now the United States is buying tequila from like Tres Amigos tequila from Mexico, because genuine tequila is only made in Mexico. So let's say that bottle before tariffs costs $40. Well, 25% tariff means that bottle's now worth $50. That's an extra $10. Who pays that? Well, the person importing it has to pay that $10. That $10 goes into the U.S. Treasury. Well, so from the standpoint of the U.S. Treasury, this is going to build up a lot of, at least over the short term, a lot of money is going to come in. So it may actually end up, strengthening the U.S. economy and in terms of its debt position. It'll help reduce the debt, because the United States has been spending like a drunken sailor over the last 10 years. So this was actually, in the short run. On the other hand, the price, what happens to the consumers? Well, the consumers are going to have to pay more for these different goods. Now, it's a one-time, if you will, the price goes up, and then, that's the price going forward. You get into the back and forth where Mexico and Canada, these threaten, we're going to impose tariffs as well. The situation with China, I think, is far more complicated, and I think China actually has more leverage. That there are so many items, rare earth minerals and other things and pharmaceuticals that are critical to the United States that China controls. The United States doesn't. And the United States doesn't have an easy, immediate alternative. So they're going to have to, China I'm certain, will retaliate. So, when you step back, it's like you can make a case that in some areas it's going to reduce U.S. debt. In others, it's going to potentially cause inflation in the United States, and as well as slow economic growth. It is, I think, over the short term, I think it's likely to be a win for Trump. Over the mid to long term, I think it could be a loser. We'll see.
Netanyahu right now is in the United States talking. He wants to meet Donald Trump.
Yep.
How is that going to work for him and his party in Israel? And what does Donald Trump have to offer him?
But Trump, Trump actually has the leverage on this. And there was a funny meme I saw on social media. It showed the president of the United States landing at Andrews Air Force Base, and off walks Netanyahu. So he's the real president. I think Trump has a different vision than Netanyahu. Now, Trump has spoken up about deporting all the Palestinians to Jordan and Egypt and Indonesia, God knows where. It's not going to happen. They're not going to happen. That's what Netanyahu would love to happen. Netanyahu is, he's caught between the extreme right-wing religious Zionists who want to expel all Palestinians, destroy them. They're keen on genocide. And then trying to figure out actually, can Israel survive? Because they, despite the claims to the contrary that they've inflicted a major defeat on Hamas, they didn't. Of course, now this war, which has gone on for well over 15 months since the October 7, 2023 attack, it is just Hamas appears to be as strong as it ever was. And what the Israeli hostages are coming out, they were treated with respect. They were not raped. They weren't beaten. They weren't starved. They were taken care of because the Hamas saw them as valuable bargaining chips. You don't abuse those. Whereas, Israel is a record of, raping, beating, starving, torturing Palestinians that it's holding hostage. So it is, Israel is really, I think, struggling to figure out who it is. Can it even save itself? We'll see. But Netanyahu's agenda, to get Trump to attack Iran. And you get these people in the United States, this General Jack Keane, he's absolutely mad, in my view, talking about, now's the time to strike. Iran doesn't have any air defense system. Nonsense. Just utter nonsense. But, there's that internet acronym, FAFO, you know, the F is a crude word. But it says basically screw around and find out. And that's what I'm afraid that the Netanyahu's going to push Trump to do. But Trump seems, I think Trump has got bigger things in mind. People think, oh, you're crazy, Johnson. But I think he really does want to negotiate a deal with Iran. He wants to get a big deal to bring the Saudis recognizing Israel. He does actually, he wants to preserve Israel, but he wants to preserve Israel in terms that the religious Zionists won't accept. He's much more pragmatic about it. And he does actually, these, if you've watched, there have been some massive protests in New York City among the Haredi community, the ultra Orthodox who do not believe that Israel should exist. They believe the existence of Israel is a sin. And Trump's got friends and friendly relations with folks in that community as well. So he's not just captive to one point of view.
Larry, how does Donald Trump see the changes in Syria? Does he really believe that would be in favor of Israel, would benefit Israel in a long run?
Say that again?
Donald Trump, the way that he sees the changes in Syria.
Well, no, it doesn't benefit it. It doesn't benefit Israel in the long run at all. It's chaos. I pointed out before in our discussions that at least when Assad was there, you had an institutional government. You had an intelligence service. You had a military service. So Israel, from its intelligence standpoint, knew who to target, who to recruit, and were able to actually succeed on that front. Now you don't have anything as formalized in Syria yet. So Israel is actually operating blind in some respects. And it hasn't eliminated, there are ancient smuggling routes throughout the region. So Hezbollah is not going to have to worry about getting resupplied. It's going to happen. Turkey is trying to, again, figure out what it's like the dog chasing a car. It's caught the car, now it doesn't know what to do with it. You can't quite drive it. The people that have taken control of the Syrian government are not Syrians, they're foreigners. And they are aggressive and active in killing Christians and Alawites. But that doesn't mean that the Sunnis are all united either. So, it's a mess. And all it does is actually, it creates another threat vector that Israel is going to have to worry about going forward. And that means they got to devote resources to it. Well, they're not sitting on a vast sea of resources. They've got limitations. And Uncle Sam, Uncle Sugar is not going to always be there to, write their allowance check for them.
And that's why I do believe that they think that they can keep them under the U.S. control, because they don't have those resources, as you've mentioned. And right now, Al-Jilani went to Saudi Arabia, talked with MBS.
Mm-hmm.
Is that part of the game on the part of the United States? Do they really believe that MBS can distance them from Turkey, or it's all the same game?
No, I'm actually not certain that the United States has got full control of this now. I think it's, the Brits have some control. The United States has had some control, but Turkey has had some control. And, what it is, it's going to be a distraction. It does. Let's put it this way. It doesn't hurt Iran. It doesn't hurt Russia. It's like one less problem they got to worry about. So um, they can sit back and they can help destabilize. They can provide funding to certain groups and entities inside that can create further problems for Jelani and his crowd. So no, this is this is not a this isn't good news for Israel. They thought it was initially, and now they're recognizing, oh my God, they're going to have to worry about Turkey or Turkiya.
If you remember, the main enemies of Israel in those days of the war between Iran and Iraq, and right after that, the Iraq War, the United States in Iraq overthrowing Saddam Hussein. The main ideology on the part of Netanyahu and his administration was our first enemy is Iraq. Let's get rid of Iraq, and then those changes may bring some sort of good outcome for Israel's agenda in terms of Iran being overthrown, the government in Iran, all of that, which wasn't the case so far. Here comes the question: is the situation, from what we've seen so far in Syria, going to put Turkey in the same position that Iraq was in those days, being one of the main enemies of Israel?
No, it's Turkey is too strong compared to Iraq. But you correctly note that even after the rise of the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran and the establishment of the Iranian Republic under Islamic rule, that Israel was keen to work with Iran because they feared Iraq developing a nuclear bomb. And that's why Israel played a major role in helping arm Iran to fight Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War into the 1980s. And it was, it was very cynical. But, let's not forget that for, at least 8 years in the 1980s, the relationship between Iran and Israel was actually pretty close in terms of providing military assistance and that kind of cooperation. And yet it was during that period that Iran also was becoming, starting to realize its own ambitions and providing support to a group, first it was Hezbollah, and then by, was it 87, 88, Hamas comes into existence. So there came a point where that break between Iran and Israel happened, and all of a sudden, Iran became enemy number one. And this is, it was in the 1990s that Israel really began to focus upon Iran as the ultimate enemy, not Saddam. They were happy to get rid of Saddam. And it was, the Jewish cabal here in the United States that was staffed the Pentagon under Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, Douglas Feith. They all played a major role in persuading George W. Bush to launch that war against Saddam Hussein and to take out Saddam, even though Saddam had been our buddy. It was essentially a CIA asset. So it's just, anybody that thinks that they can trust the United States and that we got your back, that's what your cellmate in prison says to you. I got your back. That means you're going to get raped. Okay, that's what that means.
Larry, is that possible for Donald Trump to change the attitude of Israelis without considering Netanyahu being in power? Or they need to have some sort of changes in the political system of Israel, or maybe Prime Minister of Israel, to bring substantial changes in their attitude?
Well, there are going to be changes, in part because, Netanyahu's got some pretty serious health problems. And, he's not going to be around forever. And the Israeli society is going to have to figure out which direction is it going to go. Is it going to follow the way of these religious extremists, the Smotriches, the Ben Gavirs, who right now they are really they're still a minority party. But whether or not the secular Jews, the one who are not really driven by any kind of religious vision, whether they can regain control of the political agenda, is still up in the air. Right now we're in the midst of the ceasefire. I think Trump's going to put pressure on Netanyahu to continue it, but if we look at past history, it's likely to fall apart, and they'll be at war again, and Palestinians will be dying in the thousands again.
I think the investigations of October 7th would be crucial, would be so important for the future of Netanyahu and his administration.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons they've tried to stall it, prevent it from happening. It's going to, point out that either level of incompetence or, beyond incompetence, it was allowed to happen in order to create a justification for what they've done. And they wrongly calculated. They calculated that they would destroy Hamas, and they didn't. But, try to tell that. I don't know if you've got any friends who are Zionists. And when you try to talk to them about this or tell them that, man, it's good luck. I have more success talking to my dog. My dog at least listens to me.
Thank you so much, Larry, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Got your Monday morning off to a rip-roaring start, right?
See you on Friday, Larry.
All right, my friend. Thank you. Take care.
Bye. Take care.